Many people may be unaware that the planet has been significantly greening for the last 35 years, and we're going to look at some of how that's been achieved. And this is largely resulting from a great push within China, also India, but largely China. But we're going to be looking at the Chinese innovations involved in this. If you're as surprised by this as I was when I heard about it, you can have a look at the widely cited NASA article on this from the NASA study, which really shows how the Earth has been greening very, very clearly, very strongly for the last 35 years. So it's quite exciting stuff, and actually links to a whole bunch of Feng Shui stuff, which you also might be surprised to find is a big part of this, to do with the 5 elements. And we'll be looking at that more in certain classes that I teach. But for now, let's just have a look at what some of the Chinese people are recording about this. So not too long ago, I remember people proposing that desertification might be the end of humanity. But we have this incredible progress of China's San Bei Shelterbelt, which tells a really different story. So just by the way, shelter belts are lines of trees that provide shelter from sandstorms and so on. And they essentially block off desertification. And so shelter belts are kind of part of terraforming in some ways. And China's been utilizing these, among some other things, in order to really change the face of the planet. So this terraforming project of China's is mostly concentrated across China's north in a combined area called the San Bei Shelterbelt. The San there is 3 and the Bei is north. So it kind of transliterates as 3 north, this San Bei idea. So it's this San Bei Shelterbelt. So I'm going to be combining a couple of informative Chinese videos about this, which have Chinese subtitles, and translating them into proper English for you. And we're going to look at these to look at some examples of the effects where China has been succeeding in rolling back its deserts. So after the founding of the new China in 1949, there were 7 districts of military administration in China. And at that time, San Bei referred to the 3 northernmost regions. While the administrative use of the term San Bei has fallen out of usage, San Bei is still used in reference to that group of 3 geographical areas. Today, we have the San Bei Shelterbelt, a national terraforming project of great scale in terms of both time and space. The San Bei Shelterbelt spreads across nearly 4,500 kilometers, a vast area from the far east to the far west of northern China, which is planned to complete over the course of 73 years. This project started in 1978 with a 2050 completion date. That's well on track. And the project divides into 3 stages and 8 phases. The green area on the map is the first stage, which was completed in 1985. Blue is the second stage, which was completed in 2000. And red is the third stage that we're now in, which commenced in 2001. In case you didn't know, China has a huge amount of desert. There's 8 deserts and 4 sandy regions in the San Bei area alone, causing real problems for many of China's northern cities. The problem you see here was not smog, but sandstorms. For example, in 2006, there were 2 sandstorms in Beijing in April, with a total duration of 100 hours, and the total amount of sand exceeded 300,000 tons. So that's an average of 20 kilograms of sand for every person in the city. Of course, there are other areas besides Beijing that are greatly affected. Now, as the solutions depend more on labor than technology, by 2017, the total investment in combating the issue was apparently, 54,800,000,000 yuan, which is actually less than 1/4 of the total investment of the Beijing-Shanghai high-speed railway, which I guess it's possible to spend these kinds of amounts of money on improving the planet and people's lives when a productive country isn't constantly rolling around in mud and throwing missiles into invading places. Anyway, so this video we've been looking into so far here starts its showcase with the San Bei forest, which was previously the royal hunting ground of the Qing dynasty. In World War II, it was occupied by Japanese invaders, and the once virgin forest of San Bei apparently disappeared. So in 1962, 369 young people traveled to San Bei, and after planting trees here for 58 years, San Bei has become a national forest park with abundant aquatic plants and dense forests. So, moving to another example, perhaps the most famous desert that China has turned green is the Inner Mongolian Mu'us, known as the Maobusu Desert in China. Highlighted here in yellow, 80% of the desert is transformed, water and soil are no longer lost, and the annual sand and sediment movement of this area has been fully reduced by 400 million tons. Moving on, zooming in here, these black and green areas are the forest edges with luxuriant foliage, and the middle of the Maobusu Desert now has a solar power plant. Down to the south as well, there's a large area of cultivated land now benefiting from the construction of this San Bei Shelterbelt. And this is partly due to decades of effort by afforestation heroes like this lady Yin Yu-jin, seen left here. Because of people like this in this area, the desert in northwest Jingbian has turned to forest. Actually, Yin Yu-jin is kind of famous, and if you look just above her name there, written in the quotation marks, you'll see the characters Zhishan Yuan, which is her nickname, meaning Queen of Sand Control. And she's quite an inspirational story, which is worth looking up. But a little further into this video, we're going to look at how China's 5-element Feng Shui principles can be observed in the way that people like this Queen of Sand Control managed to achieve this kind of mastery of the desert. So this San Bei Shelterbelt results in more than just afforestation. To the north of the highlighted area, Wuliang-Su-hai is an important lake, exemplifying the effects of the San Bei Shelterbelt on water source conservation. In 2012, Wuliang-Su-hai had shrunk to only 1/4 of what it had been 60 years ago, and experts were predicting it should disappear within 10 to 20 years. But after vigorous treatment, the area of Wuliang-Su-hai has stabilized at 293 square kilometers of surface area. And further west are two lakes in the middle of the desert, one of which kind of wanders around the area over time. The more stable of the two lakes, the Juyan Sea, dried up, with the bottom of the lake covered in gravel and this Juyan oasis completely desertified, killing off dependent populous euphratic forest. But finally, it was determined that much of the sandstorm repeatedly engulfing Beijing was a result of this ecological catastrophe. So after a sandstorm broke out in Beijing, experts and media managed to trace the source of the wind and sand all the way to Ejinbana of Inner Mongolia. And with scientific intervention following that, the Black River began flowing into the east in July 2002, and the Gan River flowed into the west for the first time in September 2003, refreshing the Juyan Lake so that by 2017 it had grown back to its largest size in 100 years, covering 66.3 square kilometers. And now this is Zhongwei, a city along the Yellow River. In 1984, Zhongwei was still struggling, surrounded by desert. And this green highlighted area in the northwest shows the result of decades of afforestation. And Zhongwei continues to affect the desert with plans for a new green belt to the west. The photovoltaic industry is also extending further into the desert. To the southeast, Yan'an City is another example of the great changes taking place. As much as 258 million tons of sediment was flowing into the Yellow River every year at Yan'an, accounting for about 1/6 of the total amount of sediment flowing into the Yellow River. So the people of Yan'an struggled living with this drastic soil erosion. But in 1999, China launched the Return Cultivated Land to Forest Pastures policy, which has really worked wonders in Yan'an. Less than half of Yan'an City had vegetation coverage in 2000, but this increased to 68% in 2010, and in 2017 this soared up to 81%. Now the mountains and rivers of Yan'an are covered with green, and the Luos Plateau has changed from barren hills to luxuriant greenery. So this all relates to Feng Shui, because first of all, of course, so much of this has to do with the natural elements of wind and water that Feng Shui is named for. Feng being wind and Shui being water. And while many in the West who know of Feng Shui might not realize this, beyond the interior design parts of the Feng Shui corpus, Feng Shui also involves understanding how to balance the elements, forces, and geography of the natural world while integrating ourselves within it. So the Feng Shui experts of China really made an art of this using a highly sophisticated, coherent metaphysical conceptual model. One of the primary layers of this is the five elemental phase theory, in which water is used to control fire. Fire controls wood, wood controls earth, and earth is used to control water. Now, one of the pioneers of this is Yu the Great, a legendary founding emperor of the Xia dynasty in China circa 2000 BC, who was said to have ended the colossal flooding of the cradle of China, enabling its civilization to grow. He's potentially the world's first environmental engineer. Now, Yu the Great's work was really in response to absolutely colossal flooding where gigantic rivers would suddenly shift across the land, creating absolute havoc, killing a lot of people, making it very hard to establish civilization. But Yu the Great is understood to have been using this really interesting sort of very technical cosmological map, which results in the five elemental theory in China. And he understood from this technical diagram how to dredge the riverbeds, building up the highlands so that water would flow peacefully in channels to the sea. So this is using earth to control water, which is, as you know, the fundamental idea behind the earth and water phase concept in the five elements theory.